This is my TaoTao Rhino 250. It is the cheapest adult ATV available. For the $1,400 price, it's not too bad. However, there aren't much in the way of any aftermarket accessories, such as a tow hitch or a winch. You pretty much have to customize and make that yourself, which is what I'm doing. This is the second major modification I've made to my Rhino. The first was to change out the front and rear sprockets and to add more torque out of the little 197cc engine. See my previous video for how to change out the rear sprocket. The front sprocket change is covered by a lot of other YouTubers. There were a couple of YouTubers who added hitches to their TaoTao ATVs, but I didn't care for either of those designs, so I came up with my own. I used a 3/4 by 1/16 inch thick square tube, one for each side, and 1 and 1.5 inch, or 1.5 inch width by 1/8 inch thick flat stock. In the picture, just to the left of the disc brake and behind the brake line is a dog ear shaped piece. I cut this from the flat stock. On the inside, on both sides of the mount there's a 19mm bolt which holds the rear axle housing in place, one on each side. I drilled a hole in the two dog ear mounts I had cut. I'd also grinded those together so they both looked uniform, and used the existing bolt, lock washer, and washer to mount the dog ears to stick them up. I cut these from the flat stock, as mentioned, after making a cardboard template. I suggest you do the same thing. This allowed me to see how high I really needed the dog ear to stick up so I could weld the square tubing to it. So each one of those dog ears goes on each side, and then the square tubing goes down towards the front of the ATV. I believe I've got it on the second front cross member of the rear mount there. In this picture, the left side, the chain drive side of the ATV, you can see the dog ear a little better and the weld that I used to hold the square tube to it. The washer from the right-hand side, the 19mm bolt, is just showing, and the back of the dog ear can be seen here. That's on the right side. You can also see both square tubes going to the front of the ATV down to that cross member that I've got them bolted to. I used 2 U-bolts to hold the front of the square tube in place on the second cross member. I was going to weld a few pieces of square tubing across between the left and right square tubing, similar to the ATV's cross member, but then I'd have to remove the shock if I ever wanted to remove the hitch mounting system, so I decided against that. Once I welded the dog ears to the square tubing and locked the U-bolts in place, cleaned it all up a bit through grinding and painted it, I had a fork sticking out of the back of my ATV, those 2 square tubes. So I used the flat stock and welded 2 pieces across the fork where the bolts for the receiver would go. I drilled holes for the receiver and bolted it in place. Viola, I have a hitch. I slid the hitch into the receiver pin or pinned it, and I was good to go. The painting took a little. It actually took the longest, waiting for the paint to dry. You know, waiting for a pot or a kettle to boil. Yeah, it takes forever. I know the receiver is upside down here. It doesn't matter. It's at the right height, and I didn't have to mess with any other geometry trying to get the receiver level. So it worked out really well this way. So how does it tow? Well, the little 197cc engine isn't a powerhouse, but really I also didn't notice any difference than when it was just me on the ATV. So not too bad. And remember, this is only 2-wheel drive, so it's not going to climb Mount Everest pulling a trailer full of gear. I think it'll do just fine hauling stuff around my ranch as needed. I hope you enjoyed the explanation of how I added a receiver to my cheap ATV. Please feel free to ask questions about this hitch system anytime. I did the welding myself, and if you check out my other videos, you'll see that I modified a Harbor Freight El Cheapo super cheap welder, and it's working fantastically. My next modification for this ATV is a front winch. Harbor Freight had their 2,500-pound winch on sale for $49.99. How can you beat that for an ATV? So that'll be the next mod. And probably the last one for a while. I think I'm done.